So Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, was directed by George Miller, and it stars Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth, and this movie taking place several years before the events of Mad Max Fury Road. A young Furiosa is kidnapped by Chris Hemsworth and his evil horde and such, and basically she finds herself caught between his evil gang versus Immortan Joe's evil gang and such, and now she has to try to figure her way back home or find herself along the way. This was a movie that I was admittedly extremely excited for because I really enjoyed Mad Max Fury Road quite a bit. I do enjoy the Mad Max movies overall, but that was actually the first Mad Max movie I actually saw. And I really loved that movie. I thought it was visually stunning. It was just a beautifully shot movie with incredible action sequences, with fantastic performances, particularly from Charlize Theron as Furiosa. But I was a little nervous about this movie too, because prequels normally have a bad track record of, they're not as good as the original. They kind of dampen the original movie quite a bit. Even though it looked pretty good, Anya Taylor-Joy is a good actress, and Chris Hemsworth looked very interesting as the main villain of this movie. I was definitely curious still to see what this movie was like. And this movie is pretty good. I really enjoy this movie. I don't know if I enjoy it as much as Fury Road, but I still think this movie is pretty much a blast by the end of the movie. So let's start off with what I do like in this movie. I do think the actors are fantastic in this movie. Anya Taylor-Joy, I thought she was fantastic in this movie. She doesn't get a whole lot to do, but I felt like she was asked a whole lot for this movie, and I thought she did a really good job with that. Chris Hemsworth surprised me in this movie. I feel like a lot of people kind of like look down at Chris Hemsworth because he's Thor and such, but he is really good as a villain in this movie. You don't normally get to see him as a villain, and surprisingly, he's like, at times he's very dark, he has a dark sense of humor and such, but you also do surprisingly kind of understand his character by the end of the movie, and it's actually very well done, I feel like. But also, there's like a point where, there's like a good chunk of the movie where you actually don't see him for a bit, and while you don't miss him, I feel like this movie could have easily just like thrown him in there for the majority of the movie and be like, he's just gonna be throughout the entire movie. But the movie smart is like, we'll give you a break from Chris Hemsworth's character for a bit. But I still thought he was very interesting. Aaliyah Brown, I don't know if that's her name, how to pronounce her name and such, but I thought she was really good as an even younger Furiosa. I thought she was excellent. Meanwhile, Tom Burke, who is like kind of the closest thing to Max in this movie without, Furiosa and such, I thought he was pretty good for his brief role. Kind of wanted to see more of him, but, I thought he did a good job for what he did. And with any Mad Max movie, you kind of know that this movie is just going to have incredible action sequences, and Furiosa Mad Max Saga is no exception. This movie has incredible action sequences. The action sequences just get better and better and better throughout the entire movie. And I feel like this movie is just... the movie doesn't have a whole lot of action in the beginning, but like it just builds and builds throughout the movie, and I do think it's very well done overall. George Miller is a very visual filmmaker, and I feel like he balances like all the visual aspects of the story, which like I also feel like he balances like the actual story itself with the spectacle of the movie as well. Because like I feel like a lot of people criticize Fury Road because like, oh, it's just just one long chase, so it's not really much of a story. Well, here's your story now. It just so happens to be in the same universe and such, so I feel like he did that pretty well. I do think that Furiosa's storyline is pretty interesting, and I definitely would like to go back to it as like kind of like maybe I missed a few things, but it's like I do think her storyline is very fascinating overall. The cinematography is just absolutely stunning. How these action sequences are just shot are just incredible. So many times I was like watching them like how on earth did they do that? It's like I am hoping that a lot of this was practical, and most of it does seem practical, but I'll get into that. The pacing of this movie is actually not bad either. A lot of people kind of complain about the pacing of this movie, but I'm not, because like there was a point where it's like I kind of had to get up for a moment and I kind of checked the time. Not I kind of, because like I only checked the time because like I was kind of wondering. It's like, oh, it's already been like an hour and a half. It's like, oh, okay, that's pretty interesting. Oh, the movie doesn't feel like it's been an hour and a half. It only feels like it's been like an hour at most. So it's like, okay, for a movie that's 2.5 hours, the pacing is actually decent. The score is really well done again, even though it does sound a little too much like the score from Fury Road, which that's gonna get into some of the problems here, but I'll talk about those in a bit. The production design of this movie is also pretty well done as well. I kind of like the area where Chris Hemsworth's character and his gang are at, and I do think that it's very interesting to see like in Immortan Joe's area and such. It is very interesting to see like all these like different areas, like how all these different like tribes are kind of like stuck in this post-apocalyptic world and such. But I do think each one is very unique in its own way. And I do think this movie is just, again, a very incredible visual spectacle that, only George Miller could have done this, if I'm being honest. But let's talk about some things I don't like about this movie. Now, the movie does have a lot of practical effects in it, but there are some that kind of look a little too CGI-ish, and I feel like it's not rendered completely. It's mostly just a nitpick. Also, the editing at times is not particularly great. One of the things I really liked about Fury Road was that the editing at times, it kind of felt like they just kind of like cut a few frames out to kind of like intensify the action and such. And in this movie, I feel like they do that too, but they do it during sequences where it doesn't need it. Like there are kind of like moments where it's like characters are driving, it's not even like a chase sequence and such. And it just kind of feels weird. It's like, did they cut a few frames out of this? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And only to find out in the end credits that that not only did Margaret Sixel do the editing of this movie, which she did the editing by herself for Fury Road, but someone else also edited it. I'm like, that's kind of interesting. Like, why would you do that? That's kind of odd to me. And also, Anya Taylor-Joy. Now, I said she did a fantastic job in this movie. I still stand by that. And I didn't mind the fact that she doesn't have a whole lot of dialogue in this movie, because, Max doesn't really have a whole lot of dialogue in his movies and such. But the way she talks in this movie, you kind of don't actually see her lips move. You kind of just see the back of her head while she's talking. And I kind of felt that was pretty distracting. It happens while she's on camera because, like, okay, so she doesn't actually really appear until about, like, an hour into this movie at most. Again, the pacing is a bit different in this movie, so it's like I kind of may not notice, like, the point where it's like, oh, she came in and such as Furiosa. Leah Brown does command the screen as a younger Furiosa, but it's kind of weird, like, with Anya Taylor-Joy and, like, how her character, you kind of don't see her speak, but you do hear her dialogue. It's just kind of weird to me. Again, mostly just a nitpick. Also, there's a little too much Fury Road here. Again, the score, even though it was pretty epic and was bombastic and such, it was a little too much like it. It kind of reminded me of the score from Fury Road a little too much. Whereas, like, okay, it kind of reminded me of that. Meanwhile, the opening credits themselves were directly taken from Fury Road. Like, having rewatched that movie to prepare for this one, they kind of just take the same frames from that movie, and they kind of just throw it at the beginning of this movie too. It's like, you're better than this, George Miller. Why would you just do that? And also some tie-ins to the Mad Max franchise. I don't want to say they're pointless, but they just don't really add too much to the story. I won't spoil, like, one of the main moments in the movie, but, like, there's one where I'm like, oh, okay, right, this is in this universe. Doesn't really add a whole lot, but cool, I guess. But we kind of already know that it's in this universe. But most of my complaints about this movie are just nitpicks, and that's mainly it. But I do think this movie is incredible. I do think the acting is fantastic, particularly from Anya Taylor-Joy, Chris Hemsworth, Aaliyah Brown, Tom Burke even. The visuals, the action, cinematography, the production design, the score are really well done as well. I do like the storyline in this movie. The balance between story and spectacle are really well done. Furiosa's arc is very well done. But there are a couple things that are just mostly nitpicks, like how some dialogue is presented, how some visuals are not completely done, and some bits that are a little too much like Fury Road. It just is a fantastic movie overall. I definitely kind of want to see this movie again. I want to see this movie on a larger screen. Like, I saw it on a pretty big screen in my area, but I kind of want to see it on an IMAX screen to see if it will enhance my experience. But overall, I still really enjoyed this movie. I'll give Furiosa, Mad Max Saga, I'll be really nice. I'll give it 3.5 out of 4 stars. See it. So, what's your favorite movie in the Mad Max franchise? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.